Okay, so we'll wait a few minutes to see some more people show up. Good. All right, just another minute or two. All right, we'll go ahead and get things kicked off. So this is being live streamed as well. I don't know if all of you are in the email chain. I'll ask for a few minutes emails later. But if someone starts talking out of these speakers, it's someone that's joined the chat. So don't be alarmed. First, I wanted to start off by us sharing our names with each other and also what program we're in, whether we're a doctoral student or a master's student, because there's lots of different backgrounds that somebody could be writing a literature review. So let's start with you.
My name is Tessa Regal Hines. I'm a doctoral student in public and social policy.
I'm Osama, PhD program, POG, Civil Engineering.
Okay.
I'm Annie. I'm in the speech pathology master's program.
Okay. And so have any of you began work on your lit review yet? Okay, so
Well, I've gathered my articles, some of my articles.
okay, articles. So we'll be going over the whole process. And the one thing is that there's going to be different expectations in different fields and different programs. So the little things are going to be different, but everything we should cover should be relevant. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Austin McIntyre. I'm a doctoral student in English. Right now, I'm in the stage, so I completed my proposal, which included my lit review, and now I'm actually working on my dissertation. And so there's at least two possibilities, or two common possibilities. You may be working on your lit review as part of your proposal, or maybe it's part of your PhD or part of the dissertation itself, or you could just be writing the lit review itself as an assignment or something to be published. So first we're going to talk a little bit about why it is important. So what is a lit review? It's a comprehensive examination and organization of literature on a particular topic. And I think the important word there is examination. So it's not just a summary. So you're evaluating the sources. You're evaluating its relationship to your topic. You're evaluating its relationship to the field in general, what other people are saying on the topic. More specifically, it tells your audience what field you're working within, even if you are defining a new field. So for most of us, you're going to be doing research in an area in which a lot has already been said. But sometimes I was working with somebody last week who was writing about drones, and which are a new area of study, and specifically like laws relating to drones, like the federal FAA. And there's not really a lot of clear categories or clear groupings of opinions on what the law should be or what the laws are exactly. So sometimes these things are in flux, but usually you're going to have a long history of research, and so there's going to be categories that are somewhat easy to figure out. A literature review shows your mastery over your subject matter. So, I mean, this is kind of a first step to becoming an expert on the topic. I mean, it's going to be a narrow field of information, but it's going to demonstrate that you are aware of the major players, you're aware of the trends, and that you are ready to move on to the next step, which would be writing a research project. A lit review demonstrates the uniqueness of your work. So as part of this process, and this is something I'll be returning back to frequently, the lit review shows how you're going to be contributing something new, I guess, unless your purpose is just to do an overview of the field itself and just say, okay, these are what people are saying. But typically a lit review leads to another project, and it helps you understand what has been said and where there's an opportunity for you to add something new. And since we have a group of 3 people, so I consider this to be very informal. So if you want to stop me and ask questions, please do at any point. You guys have any questions? Okay, so this is a overview of the structure or organization of the lit review. And I want to mention that these topics aren't necessarily in an exact order. These things can be moved around. But a part of it, if you are presenting it as part of a dissertation or a larger study, you're going to restate your thesis, your argument, or your question. So what's the purpose of your larger study? That's something you're going to introduce to remind your readers or to introduce your readers to it. A brief overview of the subject. So, and when I say brief, it should be very brief, because when you're writing a lit review, it's going to probably be written for an audience that already has a generally high level of knowledge about the topic, whether that's your committee or it could be for an academic journal. They don't need a lot of information about the basics. They just want to know about, okay, what's your topic? Introduce it to us quickly. Mention scope. And what I mean by that is what you will / won't cover and why. And so this is something that you might hear from your advisors, as you're writing your dissertation, as you're writing your proposal, why don't you talk about this too? And that might, maybe their particular field of interest is slightly different than yours. And so, and if it's an important text, you might have to mention, defend yourself, say, okay, I know that there's this text here that lots of people are talking about, but this is why I'm going to be ignoring it. Or if it's something that's not well known, or maybe it's something that people haven't wrote about a lot, or maybe it's undervalued, you're gonna have to kind of defend your choice as well and say, people don't hold this text or author in high esteem, but this is still why I'm gonna be dedicating time to it. So you are kind of defending your choices to some extent. You don't have to do that throughout, but maybe at the beginning, if you have what could be considered some controversial choices, that's probably not gonna be the case in most examples, but that's something to keep in mind. Organization of the field, major trends. So, and this is something that you really can only come by just immersing yourself in the literature. And so having read enough, a lit review won't seem complete if the outcome is basically everybody saying the same thing. Everybody holds the same view on the subject. And maybe it would be, if you're reading about the link between smoking and lung cancer, I guess, it wouldn't be very interesting to say people are all in agreement that smoking causes lung cancer. So you're going to be looking at something, if you're going to be writing about it, you're going to be looking at something in which there's disagreement. And so you need to be aware of the major viewpoints and the major areas of disagreement between the authors in the field. And then there's the analysis of the articles themselves. So you'll have, that's going to be the main, comes at the end of the list, but that's going to be the main body of the lit review. You're going to be spending most of the time summarizing and analyzing the articles themselves, and then talking about how they relate to your dissertation, how useful you find them, challenging them in regards to the strength of their arguments. And in general, it's clearing space for your contribution. So as a whole, it should reflect this is what's being said, and this is what I'm adding to the conversation. So first, you need to be thinking about your audience. So here you have the distinction between the dog owners and the dogs themselves. So who's this review for? So for, and I guess we can stop here. You said you're writing your dissertation, right? So would you say your audience is going to be your committee members, or is this something that's going to be published eventually as well?
No, actually, I just started this semester, but I'm working with my advisor on an article to be published maybe on next August. So I just start now with the PhD program. This is the first semester.
Okay.
So I'm now reviewing so many articles and papers, trying to get an idea about a topic. Then when we later on maybe can start writing.
Okay, and so is the lit review something that is going to be published, or is it going to kind of prepare you for something else that's going to be published?
No, now we agreed on topic, so it's gonna be published.
Okay. And so who would you describe as your audience for the project?
The supervisor is gonna publish that. I'm gonna assist him with him on this paper.
Okay, and so,
Then in the journal readers, the
Yeah.
readers of the journal initially.
yeah, so first the advisor and then potentially a wider audience.
Yes.
Okay, and how about both of you, who you see as your audiences?
Well, so I've got actually two classes, and that's what I got my master's 7 years ago, and I've got two classes this semester where I have to do a literature review related to my potential dissertation in 2 years. And so right now my audience is just gonna be my professor in each class, but it's potentially going to go into my dissertation literature review. So then my committee would be my audience.
We do lit reviews for a lot of our different classes because there's so many subfields within it. So just frequently on kind of the subject area as a whole, but then at the end of our program, we pick a specific topic and then we'll do a larger lit review, and then our professors will stand in front of us and ask us challenging questions about how we have to back up what we're
So
saying.
gauge your understanding of the
Mhm,
material.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like, at least to begin with, you all have pretty narrow audiences. So you have an idea of what they know already. And to some extent, if you've been learning about this for a long time already, it's almost second nature to an extent, what could be considered common knowledge in the field versus something that's more advanced. So to save yourself time, you need to keep that in mind because you don't want to write too much about basics when it's something that you're familiar with and they're familiar with as well. So that covers the two questions. What does your audience already know? What does your audience need to know? And finally, what established beliefs about this literature might need to be overturned? So if you're, part of the process, you might be pushing back about some common views on issues. So that might be something you need to address. Maybe, there is potential for disagreement between you and your committee, or you and your advisor. So you might hold different views on things, and you need to be prepared to, defend your criticism of whatever common views on the subject are. All right, step 2, find examples. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. Asking your peers who are either farther along in the process, maybe you've already graduated. That's always a great place to look. Your committee. So you might be working with someone who graduated a long time ago, but my advisor, I only started working here, I think it was like 5 years ago, or I guess it's longer since I've been in school for a long time at this point, probably like 7 years ago. But anyways, it might not have been that long ago that they were doing this themselves. So they may have recent examples as well. And finally, I wasn't actually aware of this until I started preparing for this presentation, but the library is actually a pretty great source for help on lit reviews as well, because we have specific research librarians who are dedicated to specific subjects, like there's one for English and there's one for everything else. And they, you can meet with them and discuss it that way, but they also have documents available that are just already focused on, okay, these are some effective ways to go about creating a lit review. So step 1, get to know your reference librarian. They have electronic resources for lit reviews. They're producing as well. So the library website, and I'll go ahead and take a look at this link as well, because I think it is useful. So this is an example for applied behavior analysis, but like I said, you can find this on other subjects as well. And I'll email this presentation out to you guys later so you can follow the same link. But if you want to, if you just type in literature review up here, you can see what subjects already have documents about lit reviews. I encourage you, in addition to checking out this material, meet with them, because that's what they're there for. They're there to meet with people who are working on these types of things. So take the time to develop good search terms, and this is something that you can talk about while you're meeting with the reference librarian as well. So, and it's not just I don't think the best way to do this is just to sit down and come up with as many as you can and then start searching. Search as you're coming up with them. And then you're going to realize, okay, this seemed to work better than this term, so I'm going to explore more in that direction. So think about it as kind of a active exploration or something along those lines.
I met with my librarian, and one of the things that she encouraged in Google Scholar, or rather in Sleuth over Google Scholar,
Yeah.
is that Sleuth has limiting terms. So if you come up with like 1 million on a search term, you can limit peer reviewed, you can limit the years and things like that. You can do some of that on Google Scholar.
Yeah.
She said use both of them for the most part, but if you're really getting a large group, go to Sleuth and use the limiting terms, and then come up with some better search terms from Sleuth.
Yeah, there's, the library will have tools that are more powerful. I guess they're more focused on research than, say, Google is. And one other thing I can add, and this is, I teach English 1900, it's introductory English. You can use Wikipedia if you look at the end and see where things are cited. So if it's a quality article, you're going to be citing important text in whatever field it is. So use the library, use Google Scholar, and you can use Wikipedia needed to, as long as you're actually making sure you're tracking down the source of the information. And you always need to make sure it's credible as well. But I wouldn't say any sources are off limits as long as you use them responsibly. Another thing, as you're starting the process, it's helpful to think about categories that you can start placing different items in. And it might be categories in terms of those trends we talked about. So what are the major trends? What are the major views in the scholarship? It could be categories in terms of time periods. Maybe you could break down a certain issue into like 1900 to 1950, and then 1950 to present day, I guess. Well, maybe there was something really important that happened on a certain date that kind of changed this field in a very significant way. So you might think about it in terms of time periods. I think those are the two big ones, areas of focus and different time periods, but there's lots of other ways you can think about it as well. But doing that now, when you actually get to the point eventually of writing some sort of study or creating some sort of study, will make it easier to know, okay, what things are applicable where, as opposed to just having a list of everything that's just alphabetized, as opposed to according to contents. And so these next few slides, these are just copies. It's just the book covers of some of the different styles that you might be using. We have MLA, APA, and then Chicago style. And I've never, it's been 5+ years that I've ever recommended anybody buy one of these books. Everything is available online. Whatever's online is always going to be up to date versus what's in the books might be outdated. So the big one is the Purdue OWL for APA and MLA. And there's lots of other sources. You can go for Chicago style. There's an official APA and MLA site as well. So all this stuff can be found online. Citation generators, those can be nice. I know when you find something on a library database, you usually can, there's some link that says download citation. So that can save you a little bit of time, but it's usually small stuff, but I have taught classes where students use those and it just left out information for whatever reason. So they're not perfect. So if you do use them, I would at least double check it, because you may accidentally miss something or the information could be incorrect. And then the programs that could help you are, Microsoft Word isn't really specifically focused on it, but EndNote is specifically kind of tailored to managing citations. So that's a program you can use. And it should be installed on every campus desktop computer. And I think you can go to the ITS website and have it downloaded on their computer as well. Okay, so when you're thinking about each piece, these are some categories to think about. Provenance, what are the author's credentials? Are the author's arguments supported by evidence? E.g. primary historical material, case studies, narratives, statistics, and recent scientific findings. So this is something that you're probably going to be taking articles from academic journals. So you already know that these things have been peer-reviewed and been vetted by fellow experts in the field. But if you're looking at textbooks or maybe something that was published outside the context of an academic journal, just because it's in print doesn't necessarily mean it's authoritative or credible. So even though we're working in advanced fields where the assumption is, I guess, that people aren't going to be making arguments that aren't supported by evidence, that may not always be the case. So keep that in the back of your mind. Objectivity is the author's perspective even-handed or prejudicial? Basically, is there clear bias? They seem to be criticizing or being overtly critical of certain viewpoints without, I guess, evidence to back it up. Persuasiveness, which is the author's theses, are least convincing. So when you're reacting to a claim, it's not a matter of just endorsing it completely or criticizing it, rejecting it completely. Feel free to take nuanced views on specific texts that you're looking at. And value, are the author's arguments and conclusions convincing? Does the work ultimately contribute in a significant way to the understanding of the subject? So depending on, you're going to have some texts that are more derivative than others. And that's kind of by nature. You have a huge researcher in the field, you have huge texts in the field, and then you kind of create a field of other texts around it that are based on that work, that are responding to the work. So there's always going to be levels. Some texts are going to be more derivative than others. And you kind of have to get a sense of that relationship. And generally, you're probably going to be spending more time on texts that are more important than less important, but that's something, but alternatively, maybe some of those minor texts are more related to what you're focused on. So you have to get the balance between important texts, less important texts, and the relationship to what your focus is. Okay, so these are some slides that talk about the specific process of reading and writing. Reading forward and writing the literature itself. So this is one system that you might find helpful called SQR3. And it's survey, question, read, recite, and review. So the survey part, you can also look at it as SCIM. I think it's survey or SCIM are the two common ways to think about it. And it's, you don't actually read the article. You could say, read the abstract, look at the headings, maybe read the first sentence, thinking that the first sentence of each paragraph is going to be a topic sentence. And then after you've done that, write down your initial questions about the text. And what's nice about this is that once you've read something, you can't unread it. So it's kind of valuable to take some time to pause and ask yourself, okay, what questions do I have before I know everything there is to know about this article? So it's valuable to kind of, draw upon, your ignorance on the subject to see where that leads you in terms of questions. So I think it's helpful, and it'll help you understand the text better in the long run. So there's actually reading the text as part of reading. So you might encounter lots of things in PDFs. I know in Adobe PDF, you can include comments, you can highlight things, and you can save the document, or you can print it out and do it with a pencil or a pen or whatever you'd like instead. I think that's helpful because the problem with this is that you might be reading things over a long course of time. And if you spend 3 months reading stuff, by the time you get to the part for the lit review, you're going to go back to these texts and suddenly you're not going to remember very much. So it's almost a waste of time if you don't take detailed notes, because you're going to go back and realize, okay, I basically have to reread this all over again. So anytime you read something, take notes. And beyond just marking on the text, it's not a bad idea to finish it and then just write like a brief paragraph that's saying, okay, this is what I took away from this. That's a lot easier than rereading it. And rereading the abstract won't necessarily tell you, what your thoughts were on it originally. Reciting, and the idea behind this, when I say recite, is actually either, so you had those questions that you started with, so either respond to them out loud, which might seem a little silly, or respond to them in writing. But the idea behind both of those strategies is that you remember something better if you respond to it either by speaking or you write it out. So you have your questions and you actually respond to them as opposed to just thinking about what your answer would be. And studies show that you have a greater chance of actually remembering that information. So finally, review, and this might involve taking notes on your notes, just looking over the notes that you already have, but anything that just can kind of cement that information in your mind. And another point, so you don't necessarily have to do it this way, but it's important that you have a system at least. So develop a system that works for you, even if it's not exactly like this, because the one thing you don't want to do is just waste your time or have to redo work that you already did. So thinking about actually writing it, these are just some general pointers, and I can vouch for this being important. So a writing process, we all have probably unique ways that we go about writing. We've been in school for a while now, but there are some things to think of that help. Writing more often means you write more. So you want to be consistently, whether this is your lit review or your dissertation later on, you want to be returning to it frequently, because if you have these long gaps, it could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, suddenly everything's going to be murky again, and it's a lot harder to start again. So if you're writing consistently every day, you're going to be writing more long term as opposed to maybe doing 8 hours a day or 8 hours one day every week, like on Saturday. If you have that luxury of having that much free time, but it's better to do it consistently over time. So binge writing, and that's what we're just talking about. More text at once, but less over time. Having a writing group is always helpful, and this is something you can set up with writing services. We can have it so you can just use our space, or you can have a writing tutor available who can look at what your group has written, or just talk about what we've written so far. And this can be outside of the context of writing services as well, but just having somebody else that is kind of an accountability partner, so that you know that before I come to the meeting, I have to have something to talk about, I have to have something to write, or you can just literally spend the time writing, and you just know that, okay, when I meet with my friend, twice a week, that we'll just sit down and just spend that time writing. Okay. So these slides are about transitioning from the planning phase to the actual writing of the review. So a big part of it, and this usually comes in the introductory portion, is framing your contribution to the field of research. And generally, you can think about this as a gap in research. So what hasn't been explored fully, what needs to be discussed, what you find interesting, what you think other people would find interesting. And these are a bunch of different bullet points, but they all kind of overlap. They're saying similar things to some extent. But you can think about it as an unsolved problem. What's this issue that's, I guess, popped up again and again, but you don't think it's really been solved. A new connection. So maybe there's two authors that have interesting views on a subject, and you're going to, I guess, compare them in a way that other people haven't before. They might be from different time periods. They might have what would seem like conflicting views, but maybe there's something interesting. New interpretation that leads to new conclusions, additional step in an existing argument. So, people generally agree that A, B, and C are the solutions to a certain issue, but maybe you're going to propose like a D, I guess, or those are the steps you need to follow to solve something. Fresh application of existing concepts, critique of an existing idea, and hopefully a new idea to put in its place, and then new information and its implications. And the structure of an entry itself. So if you're thinking about, we can think it'll come to the next page, but I'll switch over to it just briefly. So if you think about the lit review as being an intro, a body, and a conclusion, the body of the lit review will be mostly composed of these entries on specific text. And so as part of each entry on a text, you want to introduce their point or claims, what's their specific argument. You want to discuss briefly some of the evidence, or what you deem to be the most critical evidence, and then you want to evaluate it. So you either want to talk about how it relates to your dissertation or the study that you're carrying out, or more generally, I guess, what your view is on the persuasiveness of the argument. What do you want to challenge? What do you find to be questionable? I guess, what do you find to be persuasive? But in any case, you're not just summarizing the first two parts. So this is what makes this different from an annotated bibliography generally, because in some cases, yes.
So are there a couple of different types of literature reviews?
Sure.
Are you discussing the type of literature review where you would look at one article after another, like in sequential form, as opposed to kind of thematic form?
That's one thing, we didn't discuss in detail, but there's lots of different ways you can organize it. So you can, thinking about how you organize them as you're writing it, and I think that's one thing I have on the next slide as well, remind me about that. I say potential outline. So you can organize your lit review, like you said, thematically. So you have like these three categories of different types of studies, but they all have like a similar view, or they all use a similar theory, I guess, or whatever way they're similar. You can group your whole lit review that way as well. So you don't need to just go through things exactly like this. Whatever way you think conveys the information most usefully for you, because I guess this is a tool that you'll return to later, but also that helps communicate what you're trying to accomplish to the audience too. This page touches on a few things we've talked about. Writing the introduction, and I won't go through these point by point, but define or identify the general topic or issue. And then it goes on from there, but this is basically a summary or synthesis of what we talked about so far. Let's see, writing the conclusion. Basically things we've already covered, but when I send out this presentation, if you're looking for kind of a helpful summary of things that you want to touch on, I'd go to this page. And so thinking about the different sections, so they could be like thematic sections. And this is good for the actual writing as well as the, I guess, collection process. Use headings and arrange in logical order to indicate categories. Avoid overly long introductions. And that's thinking back to the idea that they don't, your readers probably don't need the basic information. They just need the very concise description of your general subject. You generally only want to include information that's directly relevant to your topic. So you're going to be reading some articles that probably have a broader view than, I guess, what you're specifically talking about. So hone in on those parts that are most relevant. You also want to, a lit review really isn't the place for a lot of quotation or block quotes. At most, I would say, limit your quotations to inline quotations because it should be in your own words. And I think part of the idea behind that is that in order to show you understand something, you need to be able to put it in your own words. So you have to be able to paraphrase it. I mean, when you feel like you need to quote something, kind of paraphrase it instead. And ideally, you're going to be spending most of your time summarizing it because there's just not enough time to actually paraphrase the arguments or an article's entire argument. So you really have to condense things. I think this last point is a helpful way to think about the lit review as a whole. Your argument is primarily about the way the field is structured and how your dissertation, if you're writing one, fits into or challenges this structure. So even if that part's in the future, it's about the structure of it and maybe potentially, I guess, where you might fit in that structure in the future. All right, so that's it for the presentation, but what questions do you guys have? Or would you like to share any experiences or information you think would be helpful for everybody else? Because this is, like I said, it's, limited perspective on what writing a lit review might be.
I just kind of have a general question about a lit review for a dissertation. I'm just trying to get an idea of two things. First, like what type of volume are we looking at for a topic? And two, when doing like searches and stuff like that, how deep, I guess it probably depends on the search terms, like how deep we need to go into the literature. Like, would you say you go like 10 pages deep, 20 pages deep, 30 pages deep on the search pages?
Well, I think,
find literature.
so searching is helpful, but, as part of writing your lit review, you can also read other lit reviews. And so generally, if they're well written, they're already going to be kind of focusing in on what are important. So if you can find other
So like
reviews,
the reverse searches.
yeah. And so that's one way, I guess, to narrow the field. And you can also, I think you can view things according to how many times they've been cited.
Right.
So if it comes down to, you can always, I guess, set a number limit for yourself. Because I think, as you start writing, you might realize, if I talk about every one of these things, it's going to be 100 pages. So if you know a page count you want to shoot for, whether it's going to be, I'd say generally most lit reviews wouldn't be longer than 20, 30 pages. 30 pages would be pretty long. And less than 20 isn't uncommon either. But think about how many sources you can fit in based on, what you've written so far.
And how long would each entry about each article be? Like
Well, I
a few
think,
paragraphs?
and this could be, vary depending on what you're talking about too, but you could say, okay, I'm going to do a paragraph in which there's like 3 similar articles.
Right.
And say you could, address them in a single paragraph because maybe they are all talking about the very specific subject. They just have like different solutions to it or different, slightly different viewpoints on the same subject. But if you're doing something that seems to be kind of critical to your dissertation or critical in the field, you might want to dedicate just a paragraph to it and not address anything else at the same time. But I think generally you're going to shoot for, even for the important stuff, not more than a paragraph, usually at most 2 paragraphs. I mean, and if you're going to be dedicated 2 paragraphs to something, it really needs to be critical to the field of research or to what you're writing about. And always, look for opportunities for times where you can kind of lump things together in an advantageous way, because that's going to save you time in terms of writing.
And so since you're in the process, last question, since you're in the process of writing your dissertation, do you find it's hard to kind of make the transitions between the entry paragraphs difficult or no?
Well, I think and I can talk about this for a while, lots of things unrelated to lit reviews in terms of difficulty writing, but I think one issue is that, or one potential issue, so you write the lit review and then you actually get to the point of writing the paper. I guess then you may realize, things are going to change. I guess the expectation is that when you're working on a project this big, your views are going to evolve over time. So maybe what you thought would be relevant isn't as relevant as you hoped it would be, or you really wanted to work this text into your argument, but maybe it doesn't really work out anymore. And so that can be kind of painful because you want to take advantage of all the work you've already done. But I wouldn't, don't worry about that too much, and the way that you can avoid that is, like we talked about, really kind of immersing yourself in this area and making sure that you're reading, not only just reading things, but you're reading them closely and that you're taking notes, because really understanding something makes that less likely to happen. So because you want to do the lit review first, even though, like if you look at the prospectus form that some programs use, it's hosted by Graduate of Education or the graduate department. The lit review is like third, there's statement of problem, something else, and then lit review. But doing this first is always a good idea because you need to read the literature before you know what direction your argument is going to take.
Sometimes when we search for articles on the main topic, these articles published in outside US, like in Japan, China, Germany, and these articles they use like some method and models. Can we adopt these articles when you write your research, or can we adopt the method? Or?
I would assume that you can, and that's something I would talk to your advisor about. But I know, that's very common, I guess. If I've read research, and I can't read or speak in a different language, but it's common, to look at research written in other languages, or to potentially adopt different approaches, I guess, that are common in other countries. And the only thing you might have to anticipate is kind of like explaining that or justifying it, because you're talking about these different methodologies. So why are you using maybe a methodology that's less common in this country versus another country, I guess. But I wouldn't think, apart from just the explanation, why they're being reason not to. Does that make sense, or seem like a good answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think especially in science or civil engineering, it would be less of an issue. In public policy, it's going to be an issue because governmental systems are different in different countries, but science and engineering is going to be relatively the same across the world.
All right, so unless there are any final questions, thank you all for coming, and I'm going to get your emails. So if you don't mind, you just type it in here. And I will email you guys the presentation, and also there will be eventually the Prezi that you guys watched. I'm going to narrate a version of it, and so you could send that to your friends or anybody else in your programs that thinks this would be helpful as well. So just before you leave, go ahead and type in your email.
because he was nice too.
Thanks. Nice
Thank you
day.
very much. Good night.
Thank you.